In Burton-on-Trent we produce Carling, we have Worthingtons, we have Coors Light, Grolsch, and a variety of regional ales. On site here we process the barley which we receive from the farming community, and we process it ready for use in our breweries, and that's primarily done in 3 stages. We have a steeping process, which is immersing the barley in water over a period of 2 days, bringing the moisture content up from 12% to 46%. We then carry it on into germination phase, where we can limit the control of growth of the barley grain, ensuring that we have the right enzymes and the protein breakdown of the barley grain. And then finally we kiln it, which is the drying process, which kills the embryo but preserves the enzymes and the extract, ready for our breweries to process into beer.
The whisky market is very, very buoyant. Scotch whisky market worldwide is extremely buoyant. This is fueled by an amazing demand from the new tiger economies in the Far East, from China, India, Russia, South Africa, South America. It would appear that those countries value Scotch whisky very, very highly, and there's double-digit growth, particularly in the sales of malt whisky to those countries. One has to be careful, of course, because they're not old established markets and they can come and go overnight, but certainly the demand at this point in time is extremely high.
Sadly, the brewing market has declined somewhat, but what we have seen domestically is that there's been a movement away from winter malting barley more towards spring malting barley. There is still a significant demand for winter malting types, but over time we've seen an increase in spring malting types being used in domestic brewing.
Spring barley obviously is a cheaper crop for them to grow, less in inputs and costs. And the market in the malting brewing world would probably favour spring barley, and also it is easier for us to find a market for exporting.
Certainly in terms of the distilling market, we've seen a clear separation in terms of the variety types. They have to have certain characteristics to be accepted for distilling, and that's separated the distilling and the brewing market to the extent where it's only old varieties now that are acceptable for both. So you have varieties that are approved for brewing and those that are approved for distilling. And of course, that also affects the agronomic type, because the distilling varieties are for Scotland, so they have to be agronomically adapted for Scotland, and vice versa for the brewing varieties. They are adapted more for England. So it's getting the combination of the agronomics and the quality right for the 2 sections of the market.
And what are you looking for from specific barley varieties to make a good whisky?
Ease of processability. All our distilleries are extremely busy. It's very, very important that the malt made from the barley processes extremely well. For example, a 2-minute loss in a mashing cycle can mean at the end of a week that you've lost the whole mash. That could mean the loss of around 5,000 bottles of whisky, which is obviously very, very poor economics. Also, we're looking for good spirit yield. Some varieties produce more spirit for a tonne of barley than others do. Therefore, it's very important to us to source very high spirit yielding producing varieties.
I think the biggest change that we've seen in the market will have seen is glycosidic nitrile, which is a contaminant that ends up in the final whisky, and the distillers want to reduce this as much as possible. And when they first came across this compound, they identified that it was from the malt and derived from the barley. And it was a good example of genetic diversity, that within the 20 varieties available at the time, one of them was a non-producer, had a gene which meant that it didn't produce this glycosidic nitrile, or GN. And from there, the breeders have been able to develop this into varieties which have superior yield, superior quality, and allowed the distillers to have a genetic solution to the problem, so that as they mature their stocks of whisky over long periods, they know that it's gone away and there'll be no more production of GN in the final spirit.
What actual varieties are you using currently in your distillery?
At the moment for Macallan, we use a blend of Optic and a new variety called Minstrel. Previously, Macallan had used Golden Promise. Golden Promise had been established in 1966, and most Scotch whisky distilleries used that for a large number of years. Macallan was one of the last companies to stop using Golden Promise because there was a very heavy oily character that it gave the whisky. And Macallan is in sherry casks for 10 plus years, which means it needs a very, very robust whisky to stand that level of maturation. We've been lucky to have found in Minstrel a variety which not only can reproduce that character, but is also very, very processable, of very high spirit yield and a very low GN.
And how do you actually find the right varieties and the right barley for the distillery process? Where are you buying the barley from?
We work very, very closely with plant breeders. And in fact, Minstrel is a Nickerson's variety, which was a non-GN variety, which didn't find favour with the industry in general. And we worked very, very closely with them to develop its potential for Scotch whisky. And now Macallan has worldwide rights to sole use of that variety.
Traditionally, the breeders have actually bred for the recommended list and actually for the breeding varieties effectively for the sake of breeding varieties. And 15 years ago or so, we identified the very real need to go and talk to the end users to see why they chose some varieties and not others. And I think that was the big step forward for us as breeders, is to go and talk to the market to say which actual characteristics do you want, which characteristics don't you want, because they're both important. And we visited distillers and they explained to us about this glycosidic nitrile, and it was a really good example of them saying this is where we want to go in the future. And we set about breeding then, and 10 years later we've been successful in bringing this gene into the varieties in the marketplace. And I think that's the key, is to not breed for the sake of it, but to breed for what the farmer and the end users want and put in valuable traits into your varieties.
In terms of the volatility within cereal markets and the barley market, how do you try and smooth out perhaps what you're paying for and your supply?
We have a good working relationship with our grain merchants, and they help us source the 160,000 tonnes of barley that we require annually. It's actually an area that we're looking at the moment. A real important area for Coors is to ensure sustainability of supply, and we're beginning to talk to various farming groups and farmer growers to actually give us some security of supply.
And what sort of advice might you give farmers in terms of their growing decisions over the next couple of years?
Consider the market for the crop that they feel comfortable to grow. Look at locking into a supply route, possibly to a consumer who is looking for security of supply, and offering sensible premiums for them to concentrate on growing and delivering to that market, as against the volatility, which is to swing in and swing out, of growing something one year because it's right and then finding the next year it's wrong.
And if a cereal grower is looking at barley as an opportunity, do you think this is a good time to be thinking about putting it in the ground?
All periods in time are difficult. Certainly prices are better than they were. One of the things that we've been looking at in conjunction with Simpsons and MSP is looking at a guaranteed margin type of contract where all the prices of the raw materials are taken into account, and the final price guarantees that the farmer makes a decent margin on it. This degree of certainty is going to be necessary going forward, because people have grown a crop for which they haven't known whether the price would bring them a premium, a decent margin at the end of the day, because they've always been at the risk of weather or input costs, which are totally variable, and therefore we need to bring some degree of certainty and to make it worthwhile the farmers growing these products.